Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to session one of day two. It's great to have you all here. We're starting off today with lifelong learning through variable credentials presented by Toby Jones. Now, Toby has a love and passion for both teaching and emerging technologies, which has led him to spend the last 12 years in the education and tech sectors in both the UK and Australia. And Toby likes nothing more than sharing ideas, hearing from others, and most of all, talking about complicated things in language that everyone can understand. And please welcome Toby to the stage.
Thank you. In 1983, a guy by the name of Alan McGregor Jones attended a teaching conference, very similar to where we are today. It was in the UK, and it was in July, which is the UK summer, so I like to think it was probably raining that day. And as the teachers gathered and they took off their jackets and left their umbrellas in the corner, there was much excitement in the room and anticipation, as they'd all been told that what they would see today at this conference in 1983 would change the face of education forever. So as everyone settled and took their seats and hush fell, the presenters walked on and they were pushing the first ever school's computer. And there was great excitement in the room, and everyone was whispering about what this would mean for the future of their craft and the students and the teaching experience, wheeling this computer around from classroom to classroom. Alan, however, sat back in his seat and thought, you know what, I just don't think this is for me. Now, the reason why I like that story is for two reasons. One, you might have guessed, Alan is my dad. And I just love this idea of him being at the advent of technology and education. And he goes, nah, just not for me, mate. And the second thing is I think it's just a great reminder for us as education technology enthusiasts to ensure that when we're introducing new ideas, they're not just a shiny thing that we're hoping everyone's just going to buy into. We have to give it thought and make sure it's going to be meaningful and it's going to affect our students in a positive way. So today I want to talk to you about some new shiny things, or not so shiny things, as I think you've probably heard of most of these things before, but hopefully we can concrete some of the ideas. So to start with, we're going to talk about this idea of the complete learner concept. This is a concept that we sort of started talking about many years ago that we're now sort of putting into action with a couple of different things that we're doing. Next, we're going to start in the future. So where do we think this is going? Where do we think technology is going to take us through some of these concepts? And then we're going to bring it back to here and now. The journey that we went on, looking at micro-credentials and digital badging and how we implemented those. And hopefully there's things in there that I know already, chatting to a few people before coming up, it seems to be a hot topic at the moment. People are looking at how they can implement these things. So hopefully there's some learnings in here as well. And then next, what we're calling badging 2.0. What's the next thing that we can start looking at to further this complete learner concept? So the complete learner concept. What essentially we're talking about here is trying to answer this question from a student perspective. How do we show we are more than one achievement? With all the different access to different skills and opportunities that we have now, how can we start to show ourselves more than just one achievement, more than that last bit of paper that we received? So, quick poll, just hands up, as this is part of the technology I'm going to first start talking about, and you would have seen it in the description. Who here has heard of blockchain technology? Excellent. I started this in January, doing a similar talk, and there was literally like 3 people, and now it's almost the whole room, which is awesome. How many people are currently implementing some form of blockchain technology in their school or their institute? Excellent. A couple of people? Cool. Right. So we could talk for a whole day about the technology, so we don't need to get too hung up on it. But ultimately, the advances in blockchain technology, which really, for simplistic terms, is just a means of storing data, a means of housing data in a particular way. And it's actually not new. It actually was utilized in the 90s. It actually came out of a military initiative. But anyway, we can talk about that another time. But there's 3 areas that we think we're going to start to see that's going to start to affect us in probably the next 5 years. We'll start noticing smart contracts, awards, and currency. So smart contracts, essentially, is the ability to have a programmable contract between two people, but the actual execution of the contract is actually pre-programmed through a protocol. So what this means is that we'll start to see this in things like enrollment forms, potentially in how funding is executed. Next is awards. This is the bit that we're going to talk about today. This is the bit that we're excited about how we're recognizing these micro moments or milestones through how we're issuing awards. And finally, currency. Currency is something that has been experimented around a lot with. I imagine a lot of you in the room will have heard of things like Bitcoin, the rise and fall of millionaires and billionaires over the last few years, and it come crashing down at the beginning of this year. We're not going to worry about any of that just now. But currency and cryptocurrency and how that's going to be utilized in education is really interesting. I read a really interesting article a few weeks ago around this idea in the US where they had an experiment around this idea of normally we give our child $20 and we hope they're going to use that for their bus fare and they're going to use it to buy a sandwich at lunch. But the reality is that $20 goes down the corner, round the side, and they buy Pokemon cards. They run to school, and they nick a mate's sandwich. So the idea of programmable currency to be able to actually issue an amount of currency, a volume of money, to somebody and have it pre-programmed about how that can actually be utilized, we'll start to see more of. Now, that example is obviously quite a nice, quaint one about for the sort of more the high school kind of market. Where I can see this being a really interesting thing for us in vocational is in how funding is issued and the opportunities that it might be able to alleviate in administration and proof and compliance by actually being able to program how this currency is going to be utilized. So just a quick overview of where we can see some of these trends going. But looking at this idea of awards, we believe it's all going to play out on what's called a life ledger. So from about the age of 5, we will start to make indents on this ledger. So firstly, as we mentioned, the smart contract. So our first school application will be digitized. We then might pay for our school fees in the cryptocurrency of the school. These currency might then be used to actually buy sports kit and buy devices. This currency might also be used to actually reward students, so they're actually given some form of cryptocurrency in the school for them to actually be able to utilize at the shop to upgrade their devices as they move through. And then we're going to start seeing these awards that are happening being recognized in a meaningful way. At the moment already, we are doing all these things. All these things are happening. We've got scouts, and we've got volunteering, and we've got work experience, and we've got sporting achievements and musical achievements. And they're all bits of paper that are stored in lots of different corners. What we're looking to do here, or what we're starting to see happening, is this ability to actually pool it all into one place so we can start to utilize these first few moments to then unlock what we do next. How can we utilize all these things that we've actually done to then make a better decision about the school I should go to next? How can a career advisor or a parent look at a whole student and make decisions of where they'll go? So this will continue throughout education, and then we'll start to see this into employment, and again, we continue to see this trend happening. And all of this plays into the idea of the complete learner. So this is where we think it's going, and there's lots of data, lots of research, lots of things happening, particularly in the US, that are sort of grabbing this and experimenting with it, of putting things in place that are starting to enable this to happen. But bring it back to today. So to start with, a few basics, micro-credentials and digital badging. Now, I will admit straight out the gate, when we first started on this journey, 4, 5 years ago maybe, we used these words interchangeably. I would say micro-credential when I meant digital badge, and vice versa. So just to be clear, so we're all on the same page, when we're talking about a micro-credential, we're talking about the learning, the course, the content, the bit of education that we're engaging with. And then the digital badge is the award, it's the evidence, It's the certificate, or someone said to me, the stamp of approval. That was a great idea. So the micro sits here as the thing that we've done, the thing that we're doing, and the digital badge is the evidence for that. So, starting with micro credentials. Hands up who currently is utilizing micro credentials in their school. Awesome, or institute. Sorry, I was at K-12 conference yesterday, so I keep saying school. I mean RTO. Okay, great. Who here has read the National Micro Credentials Framework? Excellent. Who here has heard of the National Micro Credentials Framework? Excellent, cool. We're going to do some basics on that today. When we're talking about micro-credentials, we're talking about it today from a vocational, from an educational standing point. Every time I talk to people about micros, one of the first things that comes up is we've been doing it for years. We've already been doing it, and that's completely true. That we've all been doing short courses throughout our lives. I know the first bar job I ever had, I did some really basic e-learning in order to start that. I'm sure there's lots of people who've done it throughout their, excuse me, throughout their journey, have done short courses, which could be called micro-credentials without the framework that we're now talking about. And there's been a real spike in short courses, particularly over the last few years. There's some data that came out of Coursera, who are one of the big American companies in short courses. And they were saying that between 70 to 80% of all courses completed were in technology or business, and that the average age was around about 35. So what we can see from this is that people are trying to seek out short courses to actually up their skills for the purpose of a new job, promotion, a different career path. Bit of trivia, though, with that is that their data was slightly skewed the last 2 years, as there's two main courses that came out on top. One was the fundamentals of running a good Zoom meeting. And the second was how to bake the best sourdough. So I imagine the data that comes out this year is going to show a bit more accurate about actually where those fall. But still, business, technology, average age of 35 is what came up. But when we're talking about micro-credentials, though, which, again, sort of sideways slightly from when we're saying short courses, our thought process around this really started a few years ago, and my friend and colleague, Matthew Dale, who I think is in here and who's a big advocate and has done a lot of great work in helping to formalize how we're now talking about micro-credentials. There was a webinar that he was presenting. This was back in June 2020. I remember sitting watching it on my laptop, sat in my bedroom, trying to make it look like I wasn't in my bedroom, as I think many of us did back in 2020. And this idea of micros was both exciting, but also slightly terrifying. Exciting because it could free up education of the things that we could start to look to do and things we could start to build. But slightly terrifying because at that point in time, there was no real framework. There was no real rigor or parameters. And my big concern was what happens if there is a Leadership 101 course that we create and someone else creates and someone else creates. How do we actually know which one has value? And I think the framework is starting to help us to move towards an idea of value against micro-credentials. Now, I'm not going to go through the whole document. I admit I'm not great at reading anything that comes out of Canberra, but this was actually quite easy to consume. So if you are on this journey of looking into micro-credentials and implementing them in school, it's really worth it. You can literally just Google that term on the screen, and the first thing that comes up will be the framework. There are 15 requirements that they have laid out that are required in order for something to be classified as a micro-credential under the framework, and there are 8 recommendations. Now, I'm just going to look at 5 of these today, but what we were pleased with was a lot of it was common sense. A lot of it was just being able to standardize how we look and talk about micros. So firstly, learning outcomes. The outcomes have to be stated. The learner has to know what it is they're going to be doing and what the outcome of the course is going to be. The second that I think is critical is assessment. And I think this is what differentiates a short course from starting to become a micro-credential within the framework. The fact that it's not passive learning, it's not something you dip in and out of. There has to be a completion for it to be classified as a micro. And the assessment piece at the moment is still pretty broad. It's not specified that it has to be like a vocational assessment pack where there is X amount of forms of evidence. It's whatever's appropriate to prove that there has been a level of understanding and proficiency with the bit of learning that's been completed. Volume of learning has to be more than an hour. So again, I think this is trying to differentiate from sort of a 10-minute YouTube video where you're consuming some form of learning. I think an hour is a bit much. Reason for that is we designed a micro, or what we classified as a micro at the time, prior to the framework coming out. This was during the pandemic. We worked with Restaurant and Catering Association. We created a back to work course with the Queensland government that was to help hospitality workers to return to hospitality venues. And we deliberately, by design, tried to keep the course at around about 40 minutes, based on the cohort that we knew were going to consume it. So I'm hoping there might be a bit of flex to bring it below an hour. But at the moment, it's an hour, and it has to be less than a qualification. So they can't be micro-credentials under the framework. Is not something that you do for 6 weeks. It would be, if a course goes for 6 weeks, it would be multiple micro-credentials that would make up that particular bit of study. Credit recognition, does it align to anything? So there could be that this is from a particular unit of competency and that it would be recognized as part of the knowledge evidence or component of it. Is there a value of hours or a value of points? If the micro has been created with an industry partner, is there some form of recognition that's agreed upon? And finally, well, not finally, but the one I just wanted to mention for now is the certificate piece. There has to be something that the student receives having completed the micro-credential. The one thing that wasn't in the framework that I think is where this is where it kind of falls a bit short, and I understand the complexities of it, is that there is currently no taxonomy that's provided as part of the framework. So by taxonomy, I mean the relationship between the micros, the relationship between the micros and how they stack up against each other. Now, I had this conversation a couple of weeks ago at a conference, and the speaker sort of presented the idea that in higher ed, there is the ability to have a taxonomy because there is credits that can be put against it. In vocational, we could talk about the idea of a micro being aligned with particular skills from a training package. And if we're building something with industry, there would be an understanding of what a micro might be worth. I think the thing I really am looking forward to seeing happening is how, with those 3 examples, they actually all can be benchmarked against each other. So my Leadership 101 course that I did in vocational as a micro, how does that stack up to someone that did a 101 leadership course as part of their bachelor's? And we're not quite there yet. So there's 3 main areas we've started to see, and there's multiple, but there's 3 main ones we've started to see really good uses of micro-credentials. Firstly is in gap filling. Now, I'm not going to start bagging out training packages. We all know that by design, they take a long time to come into fruition, averaging about 5 years for a training package to get off the ground. Now, the issue in certain industries where they are fast-paced, maybe because of cultural, technology, whatever it may be, there are gaps that appear. So an example of this is we are doing a project with an organization that work in the social services space, vocational outcome social services, and the training package falls short of some of the requirements that we see now in a modern workplace. Things like micros that deal with specific types of mental health, micros that educate employees on LGBTQ plus practices. So utilizing micros as a means of tacking on to education to fill a gap that maybe is currently there until the training package can catch up. The next is in cohort specific. So again, just to give a sort of case study, running a project at the moment with a part of Jobs Victoria. identifying this demographic of long-term unemployed mothers. Mothers averaging around about 45, been out of the workplace for 10 years, keen to get back into the workplace, but have not been in the workplace for 10 years, so need to build up their confidence. Need to start to also look at some skills that maybe are required now, maybe around digital literacy, that weren't required 10 years ago when they were last in the workplace. So building micros for a really meaningful way to affect a particular cohort of individuals so that they can re-enter the workforce. And building blocks. And building blocks is what I want to talk about in this next component. So building blocks is the idea of how we can use a micro to build into further study. So for us, we needed a starting point when we first started talking about micro-credentials. And for us, we didn't want to start with a blank sheet of paper. So what made sense for us, as we had come from the traditional content creation side, was to actually start with a unit of competency. We've got a training package there. We've already got performance criteria. We've got a framework to start with. How can we look at a unit of competency and work out how we can break that down? So we actually took the unit, the emotional intelligence unit, that's normally around about the Cert 4 diploma level in BSB packages, but it also features in a number of others. And we broke this down into micro components. So first, we built a micro that was Emotional Intelligence 101, the foundation information, so that everyone can get on the same page of understanding. And next, we thought, what would be the level up from this? And so we built Emotional Intelligence for Self, the idea of how can I understand myself better and how I behave in the world. Then level on from that, how do I be a better team player? How do I understand the people around me in my team? So next level was Emotional Intelligence for Others. And then finally, looking more at that kind of management level, Emotional Intelligence for my business. So what we've done here by creating this framework was to either have a stackable course, which could then start to stack into the unit itself, or actually we created 4 individual courses that actually could be utilized by 4 different cohorts or individuals who have different needs at that point in time. Now, because it came from a unit of competency, it meant that we could actually map it or stack it back into one. So there'd need to be an assessment pack component. So all that bit on the left, all that covers off the knowledge component of a unit. The way that we designed it was for it to be self-paced, so that it could actually be something someone could dip in and out of on their own. But then if they wanted to get the whole unit, it wasn't as if the courses that they were done were wasted. They had to start again from square one with the unit. They could actually be recognized for it, and that would then stack back into the unit of competency. Now, I'm just going to call it out, because someone will be thinking of it. Yes, this is the old Emotional Intelligence unit code. It shows you when we built this, and I was going to try and remember the new one. BSB PEF 502? Yeah, 502, great. So yeah, this was when we did this piece of work, it was with the old unit. So this framework for us made sense. So if you are looking at creating micros, and I'll come on to use cases of it within the RTO, it's worth looking at things that you're already doing, units you're already familiar with, but at the moment are for students who are on a particular learning pathway, but being able to open it up to others. So this led us on to looking at how they were going to be utilized. So the first is we've started to see micros being utilized to actually build into a qualification. We've seen this in a few areas. Firstly, is as a recruitment tool. A lot of students today are hesitant to sign up to courses that are going to be more than 12 months, more than ever, from a financial time before they can get employed. So utilizing micros as a means of students being able to try something before then taking on an extended piece of study. At a lower price point, you could, depending on the micro, you could be charging $50, $70 a throw. They could do a few of those, see if they like the subject area before committing to then doing the whole course. If they've been built utilizing the framework before, it also means that they could actually maybe have part of the units already, they could already be RPL'd into those. The next is we've seen from Crycross providers is utilizing these in a really interesting way as well. With students being left offshore, visa delays, issues getting into the country, wanting to keep them engaged. Under ASQA, you obviously can't start teaching them offshore, but what you can do is provide them with micros, provide them with some engaging learning before they come onshore. The other example as well, and my colleague Roel mentioned this to me a couple of weeks ago, is actually agents are looking at this. International agents are looking at this to actually utilize micros that are provided by a training provider to help upskill students to meet the minimum requirements before going through the application process. So this is how we're seeing it at the front end, which then stacks into a further bit of study. But we're also seeing it at the exit as well. And this really came about by, I suppose, just osmosis, really. We had a phone call from an organization that do Cert 3 in electrical, and they have a school for electricians. And what they said was that 50% of our students will finish, and the first thing they'll want to do is start their own job, start their own business, rather. Go out as a freelancer. We don't cover that on our course. And our students don't want to now go and do another 12 months of study to do a diploma of business. How can we maybe take some micros from the diploma of business to create a startup pack with the idea of that you could do some micros in how to run a marketing campaign, how to start social channels, how to run the books, how to maintain and attract more customers. So the ability to actually extend the learning beyond the traditional qualification, the Cert 3 trade certificate, into actually providing additional skills for students to either start their own businesses or be more ready for a particular job career that they're moving into. So we got to this point, and we thought, well, that's great. Micros, think there's something in this. We're definitely going to do it. We like the idea that there was some flexibility in here. But the issue was, how are we going to recognize it? How are we actually going to recognize this? I'm sure all of us, when we were talking before about have completed short courses, been to professional development days and everything else, and those bits of paper now live in back seats of cars or in old folders or as attachments in email addresses that we can't even remember the passwords for. So all that learning that we've done is just is unrecognized. We're not utilizing that learning to stack up, to prove what we have done over the course of our lives to mean that we might be suitable for a particular job role. So this led us on to exploring this idea of digital badging. Now, quick hands up again. Who in the room has implemented some badges? Excellent. Everyone in the room who's received a badge for something? Fantastic. Good. All righty. So just some basics on badging, and we sort of covered this really a bit earlier. Some of the terminology that might come up, this idea that we're utilizing badges as a piece of evidence. Now, just to keep things really interesting, the word digital badging is also interchangeably used with digital credentialing. And it depends on which state government you're talking to, or which tender you're filling out. There are different terms for the same thing. But ultimately, it's either digital badging or it's digital credentialing is the term that people are utilizing for it. Now, even though it seemed to be talked about a lot over the last couple of years, it's not actually a new thing. So birth of badging was actually in 2011. The technology's actually been around for quite a while. And the main driver for it has actually been in the professional development space. Now, badging is part of a global standard. So anyone that's at the beginning of their journey looking into digital badging, it's worth ensuring that the organizations or the technology you're looking to use meets the global standard. Now, the reason for this is a really good thing, is so that we don't solve one problem and create another. We don't create a scenario where, as a student, I've got some of my badges which have been received by the RTO I went to. I've got some badges from work experience. I've got some badges from an employer. I've got some badges from when I studied overseas. And they're all living on different platforms in different places. We've solved one problem of having bits of paper everywhere to now having bits of digital evidence everywhere in different platforms. So the purpose of a global standard is that the badges can be moved between platforms. So this idea of interoperability, which means that I can actually take the badge, and if I start using a different system, I just move the badge with me. So I can keep everything in the same place. In 2020, and I don't know why, but they only seem to do this survey every 2 years, and so I'm hoping we'll get an update of this. But just to give you an idea about the volume, if you're unsure about whether this is something that's really been adopted, there was 43 million badges issued globally. We're seeing a growing number of applications for them, and the way we're thinking about them is this idea of educational currency, this idea of collecting badges to unlock the next thing that we want to do, be it with our education, be it with our careers. So like all good technologies, there are certain terms and functionality. So I thought what I'd do, just so everyone's on the same page, we'll just go through some of those terminologies. First thing you're going to hear about is the term backpack. So this is an example of what a backpack could look like. Now, I don't really like the word backpack, I'll be really honest. I think it sounds a bit naff, but it's the global word. The global word for it is a backpack. Again, depending on which state or territory you're in, they're starting to call this the educational passport, the educational wallet. All this is starting to build into this idea of the learner profile. Essentially, it's the place that the student's going to go to see all the badges that they've got. That's the backpack. The next term is collections. So if we're going to start collecting these bits of evidence from the age of 5, how are we going to start making sense of them? So collections is a really important function whereby we can actually pull together badges that make sense to deliver a particular outcome. Having my Scout badge and my Duke of Edinburgh and my volunteering and things like this to collect these together to get me into my high school of choice will be really important. If I'm applying for my first cybersecurity job, I don't know if my knot tying badge is going to be relevant. So being able to build a new collection that's relevant for that next target audience is really important. So just flip back there. So that's the backpack. If I click on one of these badges, you go through what's called the badge card. And this is the information where we can read up everything about the badge. There's the description, excuse me, and all the information or metadata about what's involved in the badge. And this creates a really good branding opportunity. Branding opportunity for me as the student, my personal brand, being able to show the world the organization that I received this badge from in a meaningful way, and we'll talk about sharing in a moment, but also branding for your organization. If you're running a micro-credential program and it has a digital badge awarded at the end of it, we're seeing on average between 18 to 22% of all learners will share their badges in the first 48 hours. So if you are running a course, and you badge it, and you graduate 100 students, the likelihood is at least 20 of them are going to go and share it on Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter. So you're creating this opportunity of actually creating brand ambassadors in the space who are going to go out there in a fairly controlled way because they're going to see a badge that you have created with the correct information in it. We had a scenario with an organization that we do some work with who want to recognize their volunteers. And they said one of the issues that they have, and this is why they wanted to implement badging, was that we run all these amazing events, and afterwards we have this flurry of activity the following Monday on LinkedIn. But generally they're bad photos they've taken with the wrong tags for the wrong business. So we're not getting any of the credit for the fact we ran the program. So by implementing a badge that has a connectivity to your organization, you can get credit for the various different things that you're doing. The next is verification. Verification is a key part and separates a certificate from a badge. The ability to verify, the ability to actually check who issued this, who is it issued to, and does it expire? The expiry component is a really simple tool, but actually is really important, and something that we've not been able to do before when we're handing out paper certificates for compliance purposes. Having an expiry means, and you don't have to have an expiry depending on the course, but if you're doing something in a compliance space, something health and safety, something that's going to be in the legal, financial profession, being able to expire a badge is really important. We often don't find out that our employees in the workplace have got an expired health and safety certificate until there's a critical incident. So actually being able to see from the data, from reporting, that actually that you have skills that have now expired and need to be renewed is really important. From an RTO's perspective as well, it creates an opportunity to re-engage with that student, to re-engage with them to do their update, so they can continue to have the best currency. And from verification, we move to integration. Now, integration is, in simplistic terms, is the ability to connect two platforms together. Whenever we talk about this to people, there's always a comment that's made, which is completely fair and valid, of we don't want another system. We don't want another platform. We've got an LMS. With some organizations, we've got 3 LMSs. We've got 3 LMSs. We've got an SMS. We've got this system. We've got that system. We've got a CRM. We don't want another system. So exploring that an integration exists is always worthwhile. And it should be something that's aimed for. And the reason why I say it should be aimed for is the fact that sometimes you don't know how you want the integration to work yet. You're not quite sure what the trigger point in your LMS is going to be to actually issue the badge. So it's worth going through a process first of utilizing the platform, but with the view that they're going to actually at some point overlap. So an example of an integration, people in the room use Canvas. Canvas users? Excellent, excellent. So just to give you an example, so a backpack like so can actually be integrated into Canvas like so. So from a student perspective, they're able to sign in to still the same one place, their LMS, but they can view their badges. When they leave the school, they just log into the other system, and the badges stay with them. So the badging platform stays constant in the background, but while they're studying, they're just utilizing the one system itself. And sharing, we've kind of already talked about sharing. Okay, so when we are looking at this, we're always thinking about 3 different personas. And so any of you that are on this journey of creating digital badging, what I mean here is like, what's the information we're going to put into the badge? What's the metadata? We're always thinking about these 3 groups. Firstly, the student. What information is in here that's going to be relevant to the student? They're going to take this badge and they're going to show it to an employer as evidence. Is there enough information in here so that employer can know what it is that they've actually completed? Secondly, you as the institute, what information do you want to be in here? What information matters to you? Do you want to put a hyperlink in that digital badge to a sign-up form so that someone could enroll in the same course? When we ran the program with restaurant and catering for the COVID hygiene program with the Queensland government, we actually put a link in the badge to a sign-up form so that actually the audience that were having the badge shared with them, generally we saw on Facebook, the likelihood is that their friends were also hospitality workers. So if they could click on the badge because there was something in that related to them, could they then click through to a hyperlink that took them through to a sign-up page so they could then complete the same study? So what thinking are we putting into the badge to help us as an institute? And finally, the employer. Similar-ish to the student. Is the employer going to be able to go into this badge, open up this bit of evidence, and actually understand what it is that they have actually completed? So areas that we're seeing sort of digital badges utilized really well. Micro-credentials, progression, work experience, volunteering, and professional development. Now, what you will notice is on this list is not qualifications, as this was the next thing that we came across, which was the next challenge we wanted to solve. You cannot issue a digital badge in replacement for an AQF certificate. There is not enough information in there to meet the Testamar requirements to actually have a digital badge replace a certificate. So looking at the concept of the complete learner, we decided this wasn't good enough, because what was the point of if we were able to start collecting all these badges for all these micro moments, but we're still stuck with bits of paper to prove our landmark achievements. So this took us on a journey into what we were sort of talking about earlier, this idea of badging 2.0. And badging 2.0 is actually to address this, and we've started to address this in the vocational space. So this is the badge that we looked at earlier. You can see it's a single-sided. All the information in here that was what we decided to put in here, so it's fully customizable, which is one of the charming things about digital badging. I can put whatever information I want in here. That's great, but terrifies auditors. So the information here has to be regulated. So we built the ability to actually have a multi-layered badge that pulls in compliant information from the student management system that meets all the requirements of a Testamar. So things like you can see here, RTO IDs, document numbers, you've got your overview page, and then the inner pages of having your certificate and your record of results. So by going through this process, we felt that we were able to start answering this question of the complete learner and putting our graduates in a position where, having received their awards for these micro moments alongside these landmark achievements, they were able to start to answer the question of how can we show we are more than one achievement. Thank you very much. Okay, now I think by design, I think I've left 10 minutes. 10 minutes? Oh, a little bit more, 15 minutes. Awesome. So, any questions? Where do we like to begin?
Thank you for that. That was excellent.
Thank you.
In sort of our area, I'm in education in a school sector in New South Wales, and we've been using digital badges for a while, looking at micro-credentials. I guess I'm interested in your take on that tension that's still there between warranting the micro-credentials. That's the thing we're sort of looking at. I know the AQF framework provides that rigour, the structure, so you've got that certainty and equivalence across any training setting.
Yep.
With a micro-credential, you've got that, as you've pointed out, 1,000 people can offer a course. The technology allows them to proliferate. You can badge them, you can send them out.
Yep.
But what do you think the future holds for that warranting of micro-credentials?
Yeah, there's a project that we're looking at being involved with at the moment between a high school and a university. And they essentially are agreeing a common language of what micros that are going to be created in the high school, how those, if those micros are completed and badged, how that will be recognised at the university. They're starting to create sort of a common language there. I think we're going to see more and more of those. They already exist in sort of between RTOs and industry, where there's an idea of like if you complete courses that we sort of endorse, then it's going to then we'll recognise it. How that goes on to sort of more of a national framework, I think we're a little bit away of understanding that. The federal government are looking to roll out what they're calling the micro-credential marketplace. And the purpose of the framework is part one. Part two is that they're actually going to create this marketplace, which you can then actually load micros onto. I think at that point we'll start to understand, and I don't know if they're going to use sort of a human component of there being some scoring or rating or something like they do on other sort of short course type programs. I don't think that's the way to do it. I think there needs to be some form of I use the word committee very cautiously to go through to actually have a micro to market. And the reason why I say that cautiously is we could end up solving one problem, which is that training packages are too slow. How can we gap fill with micros? But then creating another, if, for example, like with the COVID course, if we'd had to wait 6 weeks for the course to be approved to go through a committee, there would have been 6 weeks where people couldn't return to work. So there needs to be some tool, some way of actually checking it. I just don't think we're quite there yet of understanding what that looks like. Thank you, though. Hi. Yeah, that's all right. I'll repeat your question to everyone.
Yeah, you were talking about this organization who does certificate in electrician.
Yep.
And they wanted a package for like some business skills, right? I didn't quite catch if you finished that. Like, how did they package it?
Sure. Yeah, so the question was with the electrical RTO I was talking about before, about how they wanted to add micros to give their graduates business-type skills. How do they implement it? They essentially, they built, I believe they built like they called it something like a, get ready for work. And we have a suite now of about 600 micros that we've created from units of competency. And we essentially worked with them, looking at our library, to pull out which of these micros would make sense and to put into that package. And they ultimately just marketed it to their students for the purpose of, is this something that you're struggling with? Is this something that could be helpful? And it was left for them to actually then pay, if they wanted to take on that further study. Any other questions? Yes.
I'm still trying to work out how to phrase it, but it's worrying me that it sounds like China's social ranking system. And then when I look at it in terms of students, I'm going, the phrase that I wrote down was, what about the incomplete learners? So what about the ones who aren't going to pick up all the necessary badges along the way?
Yeah.
They end up, they've finished school, they haven't got, they're incomplete.
Yeah.
And so...
Oh no, I think that's a really good question. My thinking on it, and this is something that what we've spoken about a lot, is I don't think badges should always be issued. So for a micro-credential, you have to have an endpoint. There has to be something that's been completed. So you get a badge for completing the assessment piece. I think badges, though, some of the beauty of them is actually utilized for progression. If you are going to do and this is where you can use, and we have seen badges utilized within a qualification to motivate students, is that sometimes it's 12 months before they actually get that little, they get the acknowledgement, they get the boost of something, that they've actually completed something. I think it was in organisation in Queens, I think in construction. They were working with students around about the Cert 1, Cert 2 level. They implemented badges to actually give them at incremental points throughout a term. So there was actually a boost for them actually having done something so far. What you can also do as well is you can create a badging structure whereby you're aiming to get to here, let's call it 10 hours for argument's sake. And there's the opportunity of 2 hours, 2 hours, 2 hours, 2 hours, 2 hours, and then you get your 10-hour badge. If you don't make it, you've still got 8 2-hour badges underneath, not 8 2-hour badges, 4 2-hour badges underneath, which you can still take away with you. So I think they should be utilized to recognize students for the point they've got to in what they're doing, rather than it just being we've moved from one certificate showing everything I am to a series of certificates that are all about completion. And I think that's how you can implement that without recognizing progression. Does that sort of, not sure? Okay. Any more? Yes?
Is there a particular software package that you use to create those digital badges, or are they part of the SMS or?
Yeah, no, good question. So we have a platform that we built, and ultimately on that platform, like most badging platforms, there is an authoring administration side to it, where you literally will go in, you'll upload your graphic that's been designed by the marketing team, you'll put in the information that goes into the badge, and then ultimately it will then sit in your library of available badges, and you can either issue that without an integration, so you could issue it simply by putting in someone's name and email address, or more than likely you would download a CSV file from another data source and upload it against the badge, or get to the integration stage, something's completed on the LMS, and it automatically awards the badge that's sat over there. So it's all included as part of that platform. Thank you. Any more for any more? Yes?
Yeah, I'm just curious about the student side of things in terms of educating students who've been awarded a digital badge. And you mentioned before about being able to share that amongst, so they earned it on, say, your platform,
Yep.
and then they want to bring it over and they're doing a course, 3 or 4 years later on. And to
Yep.
avoid that situation of having the credentials scattered around the place on different platforms, how can we help the students to gather all of their credentials together in the one place and maintain that over time? Say the next place doesn't use your platform.
So, yeah, I can't comment on other platforms. On ours, literally, as soon as a student logs in the top right corner, it says add badge, and they can literally click on that and drag and drop badges that they've downloaded from other platforms, and they will all populate in there. I think most systems work on that basis as well. Certainly if they meet the global standard, there needs to be something like that, so it's easy enough just to download and upload them somewhere else. But yeah, it's a good point, and it's going to come down to sort of housekeeping by the student to make sure they don't get to a point where they have got 5 different platforms with different badges on, and that there will need to be an activity of actually reconciling those and moving them all into one place again.
Wouldn't you just put them on LinkedIn? Because I look at it and kind of go, okay, they're in a vault, nobody can see them.
Yep.
So I just put them on LinkedIn, and then they're actually visible to employers.
Oh, definitely, yeah. You can just share them on LinkedIn, certainly. It's just if you wanted to build a collection out of them. So, for example, if you wanted to, we were talking about before about pooling them together. So what you can do with a collection is you can pool all the badges together and then have one link that shows the 10 badges that you have. So it would only really be in that scenario. That's kind of where you want to keep them all in one place. But yeah, certainly, if you've shared them to LinkedIn, then they're already up and part of your profile. Hi.
So in terms of using that, so you've got a whole stack of micro-credentials.
Yep.
And we've got a potential student or a career counselor or whatever. And
Yep.
we're looking at it. So does your system provide some decision trees as to where they can go with that or what gaps they have? So a bit of gap analysis, a bit
Yep.
of steps to move into, let's say I want to be an electrician. And I've got X, but I need to do Y. Or I want to open my business as an electrician, then I would have additional steps.
Yep.
Does that
So I think that's the next step. I think that's kind of where we're heading with it. When we ran the project or it's still going on with Jobs Victoria, there was actually like a skills matrix, a skills assessment that took place. And essentially all of the outcomes, the answers to that were actually mapped to micros. So if there was a gap, they knew what would need to be filled in order to do it.
Yeah, and I think that becomes important because the fundamental risk for us as a sector is the more this explodes and the more micro-credentials we've got and you don't cope with the mobility of it, we actually devalue the micro-credentials. So from an industry and employer perspective,
Yep.
we will have a problem with what is the actual worth of that micro-credential.
Definitely.
And that's where I hate to say the word, the regulatory framework is going to become critical so it can't be cumbersome.
Well, and that's exactly, that was the point I was making earlier, is there needs to be a framework so that they hold value, but that framework can't be too cumbersome that means that now we lose the agility that is the purpose of them.
The agility, the value of it, what
Yeah.
actually is being produced from a learning and education perspective.
Yep.
Out of that ties into that mapping piece there.
Yep.
About what actual educational and learning value provides.
Yep.
Otherwise, you can have a whole lot of sexy, fancy title micro-credentials.
Yeah.
Someone who's recruiting or employing looks at it, but what is the actual value of that?
I agree. I think that taxonomy piece that's currently missing from the framework is going to be a real kind of crucial step, which is probably why in the first version of that framework, why they haven't tackled that just yet. Hi.
How does this then link with the USI? So the USI is supposed to be the aggregator of all students
Yep.
learning and stuff like that. So you're connecting this then to the USI as well?
So we're not connecting it to USI, and I say yet. I would say that we've had conversations with USI. The approach that we've taken with this, as you sort of maybe saw before, is the ability for students to have things in a real sort of accessible way of being able to share it, which the shareability component was not really what the USI was designed to do. And so there's definitely I can talk too much about it. We're hoping there will be a connectivity in time between those two components for sure. Yeah. Okay, I think we are out of time, but we're downstairs. We've got the whole team here over at booth 2021. So if you want to come over, have a chat, got more questions, happy to do that later today. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony, for a great session. We really appreciate it. And just on behalf of VELG Training, we'd just like to give you a small gift. Thank you, mate. Thanks very much. So that's it for this session. So if you want to provide any feedback, remember in the app you can provide some feedback. And the next session will start in this room with Paul Pellier at 11:50, creating a compliance program. Thank you, everyone.